Hi, 5th graders. Welcome to Lesson 1.7, Multiply by Two-Digit Numbers. The essential question for this lesson is, how do you multiply by two-digit numbers? Now, open your Go Math workbook to page 15 and let's get started. Now, as we begin to multiply by two-digit numbers in this lesson, there are some steps that we're going to need to follow. Step number 1, I always need to estimate an answer. Well, in this case, the problem given is 63 times 29. So what I'm going to think is, I'm going to make those into a 60 and a 30. And when I multiply 60 times 30, I know that 6 times 3 is 18, and I'm going to add my two zeros behind that, so my estimated answer turns out to be 1,800. Step 2, I then have to multiply by the ones. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my 63 and I'm going to multiply it by the 9, which is the number in the ones place. Step 3, I then have to multiply by the tens. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to take my 63 and I'm going to multiply it by the 2, which is in the tens place. Step 4, I need to add what are called the partial products. So I'm going to add my two partial products together, and that takes me to my product, which in this case was 1,827. What I know is that product is close to my estimated answer of 1,800, so that tells me that my answer is reasonable. Now, let's take a look at question number 2. The directions say to estimate and then find the product. So let's focus on the part of the directions that say estimate first. I'm given 92 times 68. So what I ask myself is, what are numbers close to 92 and 68 that I could easily work with using mental math? Well, I know that I could turn my 92 into a 90. So I'm going to write down a 90 next to my 92. And I know that I could turn my 68 into a 70 because 70 is close to 68, and it's an easy number to work with using mental math. Well, what I know is this. I know that I can multiply 7 times 9, and that's going to give me 63. So I'm going to write a 63 down. And what I also notice is this. There's 1 0 behind the 9 and 1 0 behind the 7. So behind that 63, I also need to write down 2 zeros. So my estimated answer turns out to be 6,300. Now, I also have to find the exact product. So what's going to happen is this. I'm going to follow the steps we talked about on the last slide. The first step says multiply by the ones. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply that 92, my first factor, by the 8, which is in the ones place. So I'm going to think about, first of all, 8 times 2. And I know that 8 times 2 is going to give me 16. So I'm going to write a 6 down, and I'm going to regroup the 1. Now, my next step I have to think about is, I've got to multiply the 8 times the 9. Now, I know that 8 times 9 is going to give me 72, but I can't forget to add that regrouped 1. So 8 times 9 is 72, and 72 plus 1 is going to give me 73. So I'm going to write down 73. Now, there's an important step that happens next. I'm going to, down below that 6, add in a 0. That 0 is a placeholder in the ones place in the second partial product. You have to add the 0 in to hold your place. Now, before I begin my next step in multiplication, I'm going to cancel out the regrouped ones. Now, what's going to happen next is this. I'm going to begin multiplying by the tens. So what I think about next is this. I think about 6 times 2. And what I know is 6 times 2 is going to give me 12. So I'm going to write down my 2, and I'm going to regroup the 1. Now I have to think about my 6 times my 9. And what I know is 6 times 9 is 54. But I have to add my regrouped 1. So 6 times 9 is 54, plus 1 more is going to give me 55. Now, my next step is I have to add the partial products. So what that means is 736 is one partial product, and 5,520 is a second partial product, and I'm going to add those two together. So I know that 6 plus 0 is going to give me 6, 3 plus 2 is going to give me 5, 7 plus 5 is going to give me 12, and I'll carry my 1, and 1 plus 5 is going to give me 6. So my product turns out to be 6,256, and what I notice is it's close to my estimated answer, and what that tells me is my answer is reasonable. Now, let's take a look at question number 6. Once again, our directions say to estimate and then find the product. For number 6, they give us 78 times 71. Now my first step is going to be to just rewrite the problem, so once again it's in that easier format for us to multiply. So I have 78 times 71. Now once again my first job is to estimate. So I think to myself, what's a number close to 78 that would be an easy number to work with using mental math? And what I know is 80 is a number close to 78 that would be easy to work with using mental math. Now I'm going to do the same thing for 71. And I think to myself, I know that 70 would be close to 71, and it would be an easy number to work with using mental math. Now when I look at this, I know that 7 times 8 is going to give me 56. So I'm going to write down 56. Now I also see that there is 1 0 behind the 8 and 1 0 behind the 7. So that makes a total of 1, 2 zeros. So behind my 56, I'm also going to add 1, 2 zeros. So my estimated answer turns out to be 5,600. Now my job is to find the product. Well, once again, I'm going to use place value and regrouping to find the product, and I'm going to follow my steps. Step 1 says multiply by the ones. So I'm going to take my first factor, which is 78, and I'm going to multiply it by the 1 because that is in the ones place. So I think, what's 1 times 8 going to give me? I know that 1 times 8 is going to be 8, so I'm going to write the 8 down. And I don't have anything to regroup. Now my next step is, I think about 1 times the 7. Well, I know that 1 times 7 is going to give me 7, so I'll write down my 7. Now I cannot forget our important step. I have to plug in that 0 as my placeholder. Now I can continue on with my steps in the multiplication. Step 2 says multiply by the tens. So now I'm going to think about multiplying this 7, which is in the tens, to the 78. So what I think first is, what's 7 times 8 going to give me? Well, I know that 7 times 8 is going to give me 56. So I'm going to write down the 6, and I'm going to regroup the 5. Now I think to myself, what's 7 times 7 going to give me? I know that 7 times 7 is going to give me 49, but I can't forget to add the regrouped 5. So 7 times 7 is 49, and 49 plus 5 is going to take me to 54. So I'm going to write down the 54. Now, my next step is to add the partial products. Now remember, when I'm adding the partial products, what that means is the first one, which is 78, just represents the 78 being multiplied by the 1. The second partial product represents the 78 being multiplied by 70. So we're going to go ahead and add the partial products. I know that 8 plus 0 is going to give me 8. I know that 7 plus 6 is going to be 13, and I'll carry the 1. 1 plus 4 is 5, and I'm going to bring the other 5 down. So my product turns out to be 5,538, and what I notice is it's close to my estimated answer. So what that tells me is my product is reasonable. Now, let's take a look at question number 8. Once again, the directions say to estimate and then find the product. For number 8, they give me 612 times 87. And once again, I'm just going to rewrite the problem first so that it's in an easier format to work with. So I'm going to write down 612 times 87. Now, once again, my first step is to estimate. So I'm going to start with the 612, and I'm going to think, what's a number close to 612 that would be easy to work with using mental math? And I know that that number would be 600. Now I'm going to focus on the 87, and I think, what's a number close to 87 that would be easy to work with using mental math? And I'm going to turn that 87 into a 90. Now, what I know is this. I know that 9 times 6 is going to give me 54. So I'm going to write down 54. Now, what I also notice is this. Behind the 6, there's 2 zeros, and behind the 9, there's 1 zero. So that makes a total of 1, 2, 3 zeros. So behind my 54, I also have to write down 1, 2, 3 zeros. So my estimated answer is 54,000. Now, I also have to find the product. And once again, we're going to use place value and regrouping, and we're going to follow our steps. Step 1 says you have to multiply by the ones. So what that means is I'm going to multiply the 612 by the 7, which is in the ones place. So I think, what's 7 times 2 going to give me? Well, I know that 7 times 2 is 14, so I'm going to write down my 4, and I'm going to regroup my 1. Now I think, what's 7 times 1 going to give me? Well, 7 times 1 is 7, but I have to add my regrouped 1. So 7 times 1 is 7, and 7 plus 1 is going to give me 8. So I'm going to write my 8 down, and I don't have anything to regroup here. Now I think, what's 7 times the 6 going to give me? And I know that 7 times 6 is going to give me 42. Now, we cannot forget our important step. I now have to add my 0 as my placeholder. And once I add my 0 as my placeholder, I can also go back and cancel out the regrouped 1. Now, let's continue on with our next step. Step 2 says multiply by the tens. So what that means is I'm now going to take 612 and I'm going to multiply it by the 8 because the 8 is in the tens place. So what I know is this. I know, first of all, that 8 times 2 is going to give me 16. So I'm going to write down the 6 and I'm going to regroup the 1. Now I think, what's 8 times 1 going to give me? Well, I know that 8 times 1 is 8, but I can't forget my regrouped 1. So 8 times 1 is 8, plus 1 more is going to give me 9. So I'm going to write down my 9. And I don't have anything to regroup. Now I think about, what's 8 times my 6 going to give me? Well, I know that 8 times 6 is going to be 48, so I'm going to write the 48 down. Now my next step is add the partial products. Once again, what that means is, when I see 4,284, that represents 612 being multiplied by the 7. My second partial product is 48,960. That represents 612 being multiplied by 80 because the 8 is in the tens place. Now, when I add the partial products, let's see what happens. I know that 4 plus 0 is going to give me 4, so I'm going to write the 4 down. I know that 8 plus 6 is 14, so I'll write the 4, carry the 1. 2 plus 9 is going to give me 11, plus 1 more is going to be 12. I know that 4 plus 8 is also 12, plus 1 more is going to give me 13. And then 1 plus 4 is going to give me 5. I'm going to plug in my comma, and my product turns out to be 53,244. Now, when I look at my estimated answer, I see that they are close to each other, and what that tells me is that my product is reasonable. Now, let's take a look at question number 10. This is one of our real-world problem-solving questions, and it says, a company shipped 48 boxes of canned dog food. Each box contains 24 cans. How many cans of dog food did the company ship in all? Well, what I see is this. In the problem, I see that the company shipped 48 boxes of canned dog food. And I know that each box contains 24 cans. And they want to know how many cans did the company ship in all. So that leads me to know that I'm going to take my 48 and I'm going to multiply it by the 24. Now, we're going to once again use place value and regrouping, and we're going to follow our steps. Well, once again, step number 1 says multiply by the ones. So what that means is I'm going to take my 48 and multiply it by the 4, which is in the ones place. So I think, what's 4 times 8 going to give me? I know that 4 times 8 is going to give me 32. So I'm going to write my 2 down, and I'm going to regroup the 3. Now I think to myself, what's 4 times 4 going to give me? Well, 4 times 4 is 16, but I can't forget to add my regroup 3. So 4 times 4 is 16, and 16 plus 3 is going to take me to 19. So I'm going to write down 19. Now once again, I can't forget to add my 0 as my placeholder. Now I'm also going to cancel out my regroup 3. Now I'm ready to begin step number 2. Step 2 says multiply by the tens. So I'm now going to take my 48 and I'm going to multiply it by 20 because that 2 is in the tens place. So I know that, or when I think of 2 times 8, I know that that's going to give me 16. So I'm going to write my 6 down and I'm going to regroup the 1. Now I think, what's 2 times 4 going to give me? Well, 2 times 4 is 8, but I can't forget my regrouped 1. So 2 times 4 is 8, plus 1 is going to give me 9. Now my next step says add the partial products. Well, remember, when I look at my partial products, the first one is 192. That represents 48 being multiplied by the 4. My second partial product is 960. That represents 48 being multiplied by 20 because that 2 is in the tens place. So I'm going to add now my partial products. 2 plus 0 is going to give me 2. 9 plus 6 is going to give me 15. Now I have 9 plus 1, which is 10, plus 1 more is going to be 11. So I know that we've shipped 1,152 cans of dog food, and that turns out to be our final answer. Now, let's take a look at question number 11. It's another one of our real-world problem-solving questions, and it says, there were 135 cars in a rally. Each driver paid a $25 fee to participate in the rally. How much money did the drivers pay in all? Well, as I read through the problem, I noticed a few things. I noticed that there were 135 cars in the rally, and that each driver paid a $25 fee to participate. The question is, how much money did the drivers pay in all? So that leads me to know that I'm going to multiply. So I'm going to take my 135 and I'm going to multiply that by the $25 fee. Now I'm going to once again use place value and regrouping, and we're going to follow our steps. Step 1 says multiply by the ones. And what that means is we're going to take the 135 and multiply it by the 5, which is in the ones place. So I first think, what's 5 times 5 going to give me? I know that 5 times 5 is going to give me 25, so I'm going to write down the 5, and I'm going to regroup the 2. Now I think to myself, what's 5 times 3 going to give me? Well, I know that 5 times 3 is 15, but I can't forget to add my regrouped 2. So 5 times 3 is 15, and 15 plus 2 is going to give me 17. So I'm going to write down my 7, and I'm going to regroup the 1. Now I think to myself, what's 5 times the 1 going to give me? Well, 5 times 1 is 5, but I have to add my regrouped 1. So 5 times 1 is 5, plus 1 is going to give me 6. Now, we cannot forget our important step here. We have to add the 0 as the placeholder in the ones place in the second partial product. Now once I add the 0, I can also cross out the regrouped numbers from when I multiplied by the ones. Now step number 2 says multiply by the tens. So what's going to happen next is this. I'm now going to multiply my 135 by my 2, which is in the tens place. So I first of all think, what's 2 times 5 going to give me? Well, I know that 2 times 5 is going to be 10, so I'm going to write down my 0, and then I'm going to regroup my 1. Now I think, what's 2 times 3 going to give me? And I know that 2 times 3 is 6, but I have to add that regrouped 1. So 2 times 3 is 6, plus 1 is going to give me 7. Now I don't have any number to regroup here. So I think next, what's 2 times the 1 going to give me? Well, I know that 2 times 1 is going to give me 2, so I'm going to write the 2 down. Now, my next step is add the partial products. Now remember, when I look at the first partial product, which is 675, that represents 135 being multiplied by 5. And when I look at my second partial product, which is 2,700, that represents my 135 being multiplied by 20 because my 2 is in the tens place. Now, let's add those partial products. I know that 5 plus 0 is going to give me 5, 7 plus 0 is going to give me 7, 6 plus 7 is going to give me 13, and then 1 plus 2 is going to give me 3. So my answer turns out to be $3,375. Now, let's take a look at your homework questions. You need to complete questions number 1 and 2, as well as numbers 3 through 6 from your Go Math workbook on page 16. Now, don't forget, somewhere on your homework page you need to let me know, do you feel like you're number 1 a novice, number 2 an apprentice, number 3 a practitioner, or number 4 an expert? Don't forget, your homework questions for tonight are numbers 1 and 2, as well as 3 through 6, found on page 16 in your Go Math workbook. I hope you have a great evening, and I look forward to seeing you in class tomorrow.